In Hollywood, there are vows not written in ink, but carved in blood and tears over nearly a century. You would never be able to recognize today's most seductive icons of the world when behind marriages that endured for more than 80 years of a human lifetime lie countless secrets never once revealed. But behind faces worn down by time lies a great love forged through the rawest forms of tragedy. How could Meryl Streep still smile after once screaming in grief beside the body of her first love, only to build an enduring family from that pain? Or a dashing Paul Newman, willing to kneel and gather the shattered pieces of trust after his wanderings, just to earn a single hand to hold in old age? They survived the golden era and chose to walk together through hell to reach paradise. Is love at its brightest when it has been cleansed by tears and forgiveness? Join me as we turn the untold pages of lives in which legends transformed fracture into eternity, starting now. Pierre Mais Meryl Streep, un don Goomer. In 1978, Hollywood joyfully welcomed a new legend. Behind the thunderous applause for her role in The Deer Hunter, few knew that Meryl Streep was walking through the deepest layers of hell. As the world began to praise her innate talent, the truth was that this woman was a shattered soul, penniless, carrying an open wound that still bled in quiet spurts. All tragedy began with John Cazale, her greatest love, her mentor, and the deepest pain of Meryl's life. For many long months, she set aside all glory to remain by his hospital bed, reading newspapers and performing scenes for John until the very moment he took his final breath from lung cancer. Bitterly, while John's body had not even grown cold, landlords appeared coldly evicting her from the apartment they had shared. In dazzling New York, Meryl stood there with a few cardboard boxes, no support to lean on, her eyes dimmed by exhaustion and an overwhelming sense of loss. It was at this moment that Don Gummer appeared. Not a celebrated leading man with flowery promises, Don was simply a quiet sculptor, a friend of her brother. He extended his hand, offering Meryl his apartment so she would have a place to stay. What he cleared away was not only a dusty living space, but the devastated ruins inside her heart. He did not try to replace John. He simply stood there silent and steady like a stone statue amid the storm raging within Meryl. Their endurance began amid a so-called tragedy in public opinion. Only 6 months after John's death, Meryl married Don. People mocked her as heartless, a woman rushing to seal off the past in order to find a new harbor. Few understood that in a decaying Hollywood filled with vanity, Don was the only lifeline keeping Meryl from sinking into the abyss. Don's love required no display. It was a quiet strength, vast enough to embrace the painful past of the woman he loved. For the next 45 years, Don Gummer carried out a noble mission, fully accepting life in the shadows so his wife could shine. When Meryl Streep became the most powerful icon of her generation, with a record 21 Oscar nominations, Don remained quietly at her side a few steps away from the red carpet. That sacrifice came at a tremendous cost. He accepted life as the shadow, patiently raising 4 children so his wife could burn herself completely for art. The peak of that understanding was revealed on Oscar night in 2012. On the stage of glory before millions of viewers, Meryl looked directly at Don and choked up, "You are the last person I thank. But I want you to know that everything I treasure most in this life is because you gave it to me." Life, though, is not always a perpetual happy ending, like in films. At the end of 2023, the world was stunned to learn that they had secretly lived apart for more than 6 years. Now, at 77, Meryl remains a solitary icon. Many mourn a fortress that had long been hollow inside, but when seen through the lens of reverence, another truth appears. They fulfilled their mission of saving each other's lives. Don saved Meryl from the depths of despair, and Meryl devoted her most radiant years to honoring that love. Their quiet separation is not the collapse of failure, but a respectful freedom reached after walking a long journey together. You may no longer recognize the happy woman of the past, but you must bow in respect before a love once great enough to turn broken fragments into an immortal legend. 2. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. If Hollywood is a cathedral of dreams, then the half-century marriage of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward is its most beautiful hymn. People often speak of them as a symbol of unwavering fidelity, but if you turn back to the opening chapters, you will see that it did not begin with roses, but arose from painful choices and a deep sense of guilt. In 1953, Paul Newman met Joanne while they were both performing in the play Picnic. At that time, Paul already had a stable family. Joanne's arrival felt like destiny, a powerful mutual understanding strong enough to sweep away every barrier. Paul left his old home to follow the call of his heart, a dark beginning that branded them both as a betrayer and a third party. Paul later admitted in his memoir that he carried that ghost of guilt for the rest of his life. They married on the ruins of another family, a heavy price that the glow of red carpets never fully revealed. The true tragedy began only after the velvet curtain fell. In 1978, the death of Scott Newman, Paul's only son from a drug overdose, struck a devastating blow to their fortress of happiness. Paul, a proud father, collapsed completely. He drowned himself in endless drinking to escape reality, even becoming entangled in rumors of infidelity born from despair. Meanwhile, Joanne faced alone the pain of losing her child and the terrifying silence of her husband. On some nights, Paul knelt amid pools of alcohol and tears, begging forgiveness for past sins he believed his son's death had come to punish. They stood at the very edge of collapse, nearly letting go of each other as the ghosts of the past closed in. What held them together was a perseverance bordering on cruelty. Paul Newman once delivered a famous line, "Why should I go out for a hamburger when I have the best steak at home?" In truth, to keep that steak, they had to chew and swallow the bitterness of forgiveness together. Paul worked relentlessly to quit drinking. Joanne learned to embrace the dark corners of her husband's soul. They did not choose to walk away when the storm came. They chose to repair the cracks side by side. In 2008, Paul passed away in Joanne's arms after 51 years together. Tragedy did not end there. Joanne Woodward is now 96 years old, no longer the proud goddess she once was. She has lived with Alzheimer's disease for nearly 2 decades. Inside a quiet mansion in Connecticut, Joanne has forgotten who Paul was, forgotten the prestigious Oscar statues, and forgotten even the legend she herself helped build. Perhaps that forgetting is a merciful arrangement of fate. She has forgotten the pain, forgotten old mistakes, leaving her soul at peace after a lifetime devoted entirely to love. 3. Kirk Douglas and Ann Buydens. If there is a marriage that defied every moral and fidelity standard in Hollywood, it is surely the 66-year journey through every bitter flavor of life shared by the giant Kirk Douglas and his steel-willed wife, Ann Buydens. It all began in 1953 on a film set in Paris. Kirk Douglas at the time was a true wandering beast, powerful, arrogant, and able to have any woman with a single wink. Yet Ann Buydens, an elegant European woman, did the unthinkable. She said no to his dinner invitation. That rejection struck a hard blow to Kirk's pride and made him realize that she was the only woman unmoved by his fame. They married a year later, beginning a 66-year journey in which Ann was not only a wife, but the chief architect of Kirk's deeply flawed life. But behind that steadfast hand-holding lay a dark and tragic underside. Kirk Douglas was never a faithful man. In his memoirs, he candidly admitted to extramarital affairs, and painfully, Ann knew everything. Instead of choosing loud confrontations or divorce to claim a vast fortune, Ann chose another path. She accepted her husband's infidelity as part of the nature of a giant. She once said, "How could I expect a man like Kirk to be completely faithful?" It was a costly act of tolerance, a price not every woman would have the courage to pay. The true tragedy struck when the ghosts of glamour came to collect their debt. In 2004, they faced the greatest pain of a lifetime, the death of their youngest son, Eric, from a drug overdose after years of struggling with addiction. Earlier, Kirk himself had nearly died in a catastrophic plane crash that killed 2 of his friends. These events shattered Kirk's will, turning a legendary Spartacus into a broken old man. In those darkest moments, Anne proved that love is not about counting how many times one has been betrayed, but about being the one who stays behind to clean up the ruins of each other's lives. Their final moments resembled a legend stepping out of reality. Kirk Douglas passed away in 2020 at the age of 103, and just over a year later, Anne peacefully followed him at 102. They lived through an entire century together, bearing the scars of infidelity, the funerals of their children, and catastrophic accidents side by side. 4. Jeff Bridges and Susan Geston. In a world where glamorous beauty is treated as a passport to every relationship, the story of the dude Jeff Bridges and Susan Geston began in a way that could hardly be more unusual. It was not love at first sight beneath colored lights, but a connection that took root in raw, exposed wounds. It all began in 1975 on the set of Rancho Deluxe in Montana. Amid the crowd, the eyes of actor Jeff Bridges were locked onto a local waitress carrying plates of food. Susan Geston at that time was anything but radiant. Instead, her face was covered in bruises and her eyes were darkened, terrifying remnants of a car accident just days earlier. Jeff, a rugged Hollywood drifter, was instantly undone. He did not fall in love with perfection. He fell in love with the way she held her head high in defiance of the scars on her face. He approached and asked her out, but Susan, with the toughness of a Western girl, flatly replied, "No." It was only days later at a wrap party that they truly began the first chapter of a journey that would last nearly half a century. Yet the tragedy of this marriage did not come from the outside, but from the demon within Jeff Bridges himself. He suffered from chronic fear of commitment. Jeff loved Susan madly, but was terrified by the binding nature of marriage. For a long time, he hurt Susan deeply with his hesitation. There came a moment when Susan had to issue an ultimatum, packing her suitcase and walking out of his life, because she could no longer wait for a man who refused to grow up. Only when faced with the risk of losing her forever did Jeff awaken to the realization that Susan was not just his lover, she was the oxygen that kept him breathing. He dropped to his knees and begged her to return, beginning a marriage more enduring than any monument in the capital of cinema. The strength of that endurance was tested most brutally in 2020, when Jeff Bridges announced that he had lymphoma, followed by a life-and-death battle with the pandemic. There were moments when the giant Jeff collapsed to the point that he could no longer stand on his own 2 feet. And it was then that the woman with the old scar, once again, became the pillar. Susan held his hand through the ravages of chemotherapy, the sole person keeping the flame of life within him from going out. Jeff admitted that without Susan's steel-like strength, he would have given up long ago. The most precious detail, the one that melts the heart more than any film script, is Jeff's old wallet. After 47 years, through countless upheavals, triumphs, and tragedies inside it, still lies carefully kept a photograph of Susan Geston with the bruised face from the day they first met. To Jeff, that scar is not ugliness. It is the symbol of a love that saved his life from the emptiness of Hollywood. They proved that a lasting marriage does not need a perfect beginning. It only needs 2 people brave enough to embrace each other's scars until their final breath. 5. Sam Elliott and Katharine Ross. In a world where Hollywood's glare can incinerate any relationship overnight, Sam Elliott and Katharine Ross chose to live like solitary travelers within their own sacred ground. Their story began in the most unexpected way, an unknown man secretly loving a goddess. In 1969, when Katharine Ross was shining brilliantly after the success of The Graduate, Sam Elliott was merely an anonymous stand-in actor briefly appearing in Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. At the time, Sam could only stand at a distance gazing at Katharine with the awe of a true fanboy. He did not even dare approach to say hello, because the gap in status was too vast. Nearly 10 years later, fate finally smiled on Sam when they co-starred in the horror film The Legacy. This time the cowboy with the signature deep voice did not let the opportunity slip away. Sam's rough, unpolished sincerity captured the heart of the most desirable woman in Hollywood at the time. Yet the tragedy of beautiful couples is always the ruthless scrutiny of public opinion. From the very beginning, their marriage faced endless rumors of fracture. Whispers spread that the coarse, blunt nature of a Texas man like Sam would soon shatter Katharine's refined spirit. Hollywood does not believe in lasting love unless it is displayed outwardly. But the truth behind it was a darker reality of sacrifice. They chose a completely secluded life. They left behind the glittering mansions of Beverly Hills to move to a remote ranch in Malibu, where there were only ocean waves and barren mountain ridges. Sam Elliott once nearly gave up the role of a lifetime in Mask simply because it coincided with their honeymoon. It was Katharine herself who picked up the phone, called his agent, and said, "Don't worry, he'll be there." They were not just husband and wife. They were teammates protecting each other's privacy with absolute loyalty. In the vibrant 21st century, they lived like people from the previous one, quiet afternoons on the ranch tending horses together, watching time drift by. Now looking at them, you would no longer recognize the glamorous Katharine Ross of the 1960s or the youthful, roguish Sam Elliott. Time has carved deep wrinkles into their faces. Sam's hair has turned snow white, but the way he looks at Katharine still carries the same infatuation of the fanboy he was in 1969. Amid a Hollywood overflowing with fast food romances, the cowboy ballad of Sam and Katharine continues to resonate, deep, enduring, and built on a simple philosophy: silence is golden, and privacy is the key to eternity. 6. Jamie Lee Curtis and Christopher Guest. In a universe of fabricated glamour, the 40-year marriage of Jamie Lee Curtis and Christopher Guest feels like a reckless wager made by fate itself, where a joke turns into destiny and a silent tragedy becomes the glue binding two souls together. It all began on an afternoon in 1984, an origin that sounds like the script of a cheap romantic comedy. Jamie, then the rebellious Scream Queen, was flipping through a copy of Rolling Stone magazine when she stopped at a photograph of Christopher Guest. Without a second's hesitation, she pointed at the unfamiliar man's face and declared to her close friend, "I'm going to marry that guy." A mad assertion of youth, yet fate has its own strange machinery. Just 5 months after that fateful gesture, they stood before the altar, exchanging vows that the world was convinced would soon wither under the weight of Hollywood. Yet behind the radiant smiles on the red carpet lurked a dark side haunted by ghosts. For a long, grinding decade, Jamie Lee Curtis lived a painfully double life. A powerful A-list star before the cameras and a pitiful addict to painkillers in the shadows. She hid that secret from the entire world, gnawing on shame and isolation as addiction slowly devoured her reason. At the moment when Jamie was ready to give up everything, ready to let herself sink into the abyss of self-destruction, Christopher Guest the clown, with a deeply contemplative soul, did not abandon her. He did not judge, did not make a spectacle. He chose instead to become a steadfast anchor in his wife's storm. Christopher was the one who took Jamie's trembling hands patiently, walking with her through the brutal days of recovery, helping her confront psychological scars that had never healed. From that point on, their marriage ceased to be a frivolous romance and became a fortress of redemption, where people love each other for their flaws, not for their perfection. Today, they still choose a simple life, far from glittering scandals. Jamie often jokes that their secret is simply, "Don't leave." But behind that simple phrase lies an entire ocean of compassion. They prove that the most precious marriage is not one without cracks, but one in which two people have patiently gathered every fragment to create a breathtaking mosaic. 7. Denzel Washington and Pauletta Pearson. In a Hollywood empire where marriages are often as fragile as soap bubbles under bright lights, Denzel Washington and Pauletta Pearson stand like a towering old tree. Their love was not a gamble of chance, but a steadfast journey of two souls who chose to sink their roots deep into the earth and let the storms rage above them. It all began in 1977 on the set of the television film Wilma. At the time, Denzel was not yet the sexiest man on the planet with 2 Oscar statuettes. He was merely a young actor searching for his place. Pauletta, meanwhile, was already a gifted pianist with a proud, self-possessed spirit. Only on the 3rd attempt, when Denzel proved that his love was not youthful impulsiveness, but the commitment of a grown man, did Pauletta finally say yes. That beginning foretold the very essence of this couple. They did not come together for glory, but for an understanding that pierced through outer appearances. Yet when Denzel Washington exploded into a global superstar for an entire generation, their marriage entered a dark zone riddled with traps. The pressure of fame is an invisible monster. For more than 40 years, relentless rumors of infidelity and whispers of women surrounding Denzel persisted. There were moments when Hollywood held its breath, waiting for a divorce announcement, convinced that Pauletta could not withstand the weight of the world's covetous gaze fixed on her husband. But they were wrong. Amid the raging waves, Pauletta chose to become the roots, silent yet unyielding. She did not step before the cameras to defend herself. She stood behind the scenes to preserve absolute calm for her family. Denzel has admitted that their endurance did not come from any miracle, but from a stark truth: hard work. He said, "People talk about romance, but marriage is hard work. We've had to fight to compromise and to learn forgiveness every single day." Today, you would no longer recognize the hot-headed, self-assertive Denzel of the 1980s in the image of the composed man who now always holds his wife's hand on every red carpet. In his 70s, Denzel still looks at Pauletta with profound reverence, as if gazing back at the very source that kept him from being swept away by a chaotic world. 8. Christopher Walken and Georgianne Walken. In a cinematic universe where Christopher Walken is forever typecast as eccentric villains, menacing psychopaths with chilling stares, or figures hovering at the edge of madness, his real life is the gentlest of paradoxes. Behind films steeped in violence and instability lies an almost unbelievable haven of calm, a marriage lasting more than half a century, with the one woman who truly understands his strange frequency, Georgianne Walken. It all began in 1963 during the touring production of the musical West Side Story. At that time, Christopher was not yet the actor with the famously fractured cadence that all of Hollywood would later imitate. He was simply a young dancer, brimming with ambition. Georgianne, meanwhile, was a sharp, intelligent woman with a keen artistic eye. They met beneath the glittering stage lights of Broadway, a union of 2 extremes: on one side, the instinctive, explosive force of performance; on the other, the cool clarity of a future casting director. They married in 1969, beginning a journey in which Georgianne chose to step back, using the iron hands of a casting professional to shape and safeguard her husband's career. Yet their endurance carries a lonely shadow that the public has often dissected. They chose not to have children. In an era when children were seen as the sole bond holding a family together, the Walkens' decision felt like a provocation. They wanted to devote their full focus to their careers and to each other. Christopher has openly admitted that had they had children, he likely would never have achieved the career he enjoys today, because he would have had to trade artistic madness for the stability of fatherhood. That choice turned them into a private island, an absolute bond, but one tinged with the bitterness of solitude as time flows on. Countless rumors and doubts surrounded them. Could a marriage without the laughter of children truly endure amid the temptations of Hollywood? Reality proved the opposite. For more than 55 years, while Christopher portrayed killers and cold-blooded mobsters on screen, his real life remained strangely simple. Each time a film-wrapped Hollywood's madman would hurry home to eat his favorite dishes cooked by Georgianne. The value of their endurance lies in the fact that they did not need blood ties to bind them. They were bound by absolute understanding between 2 artistic souls. Georgianne has cast thousands of actors for iconic productions like The Sopranos. Yet to her, the most important and successful contract of her life was her eccentric husband. Together they have traversed more than half a century, proving that the meeting of two extremes does not have to result in an explosion, it can create a gentle, eternal current. 9. Samuel L. Jackson and LaTanya Richardson. In cinema, Samuel L. Jackson embodies pure eruption, a man whose profane rhythmic tirades and thunderous rage can incinerate the screen. But behind Hollywood's most powerful badass lies a 44-year love story, built not on sweetness but on blood tears, and a redemption forged in cruelty to its very end. It is the collision of untamed fury with the cool steel gentleness of LaTanya Richardson. It all began in 1970 in Atlanta amid the sweltering heat of racial protests and the civil rights movement. Samuel and LaTanya met as passionate college students standing together on the front lines against injustice. Their love did not grow from lavish dates. It was forged amid tear gas and chants for freedom. LaTanya, a gifted actress with a formidable spirit, saw beneath Samuel's careless exterior a genius held back. They married in 1980, uniting two souls with shared ideals, but it was also when darkness began to gather. The true tragedy took root when Samuel L. Jackson sank into the black hole of addiction. In the early 1990s, Samuel was not a star. He was a severe drug addict. The lowest point came on a bleak afternoon when LaTanya and their young daughter returned home and were horrified to find Samuel collapsed on the kitchen floor, surrounded by filthy drug paraphernalia. In that moment, instead of abandoning the broken man who had betrayed his vows, LaTanya chose a ruthless form of tenderness. She did not cry or beg. She issued an iron command: go to rehab immediately or lose everything. She was the one who forced him into treatment, the one who guarded the last fragments of his dignity. Samuel has admitted that without LaTanya's grip, hard as shackles, the world would never have known a cinematic legend, only the anonymous grave of a man who overdosed. Their endurance is precious because it was forged in the red-hot fire of forgiveness. Just weeks after completing rehab, Samuel landed his breakthrough role in Jungle Fever, playing an addict. He acted with the raw agony of his own withdrawal under his wife's uncompromising watch. LaTanya was not only his wife, she was his harshest critic. She never let the glow of Nick Fury or a Jedi blind her. She was always the one who pulled him back to earth, reminding him of the man who once lay collapsed on the kitchen floor. Samuel once said with reverent eyes, "She's the one who keeps me alive, literally." At 77, Samuel L. Jackson remains an unshakable icon of Hollywood. You would never recognize the gaunt addict with dull eyes from the 1990s in the powerful, elegant gentleman of today. But behind every steady step he takes on the red carpet, there is always the presence of LaTanya, the woman who spent 44 years taming a raging fury and transforming it into a legend. Desmites, Dolly Parton and Carl Dean. In the entertainment world, Dolly Parton is an unmixable force. Her rhinestone-studded outfits and soaring voice can move even the most hardened hearts. Yet behind that blinding brilliance lies one of the strangest marriages in Nashville history, a love lasting nearly 6 decades with a man the public has almost never seen. It all began on a fateful day in 1964 at the Wishy-Washy Laundromat in Nashville. It was Dolly's very first day in the city of music, where she had come to chase her dream. Amid piles of worn clothes and the sharp scent of detergent, Carl Dean, a young man who worked laying asphalt, approached the beautiful 18-year-old girl and offered her a sincere piece of advice about staying out of the sun, Dolly later recalled. He looked straight into my eyes, which very few men ever did when they saw me. That rough, unpolished sincerity struck Dolly down at first sight. They married 2 years later, beginning a 58-year journey in which Carl Dean chose a singularly strange path, complete disappearance from the spotlight. That very disappearance gave rise to a dark cloud of suspicion. Carl Dean deeply hated the stage lights. For more than half a century, he appeared with his wife at exactly one music award ceremony, and then swore he would never do it again. His absence became prime fuel for whispers of divorce, infidelity, And even rumors that Carl Dean did not exist at all, that he was merely a fictional character invented by Dolly to conceal a lonely life. For 50 years, malicious voices repeatedly spread tales of cracks and fractures, claiming that this endurance was nothing more than an expensive image contract. But the truth behind it all was a philosophy of living as wise as it was ruthless. The more dazzling Dolly was, the more Carl preferred work overalls and life on the farm. Their endurance was not built on shared red carpet photos, but on absolute respect for personal space. Dolly once revealed a striking secret. We never get tired of each other because we have space to breathe. When I come home, I'm Carl's Dolly, not the world's Dolly. Carl was the one who kept Dolly grounded amid the mad temptations of fame, the only man who never treated her as a commercial product. But by the end of 2024, fate separated them forever. Carl Dean passed away peacefully, taking the secret of his aged face with him into the earth, leaving Dolly with a void that even millions of stage lights could never fill. The world sees a Dolly Parton who still shines, still smiles and talks, but you cannot see the deep pain hidden behind the heavy layers of makeup. She marked her wedding anniversary alone, recreating old memories by continuing to live the great life Carl had always wanted for her. Their final secret is no longer privacy, but the presence of one soul in every breath of the one left behind. Dolly once said, "I'll love him until I don't have breath anymore." And now with Carl gone, she continues to sing, continues to shine like a radiant rose, finishing the symphony left unfinished by the quiet silhouette of her life. The endurance of the Parton-Dean union did not end at the grave. It became a legend of absolute loyalty where even death could not fade the vow first spoken at the wishy-washy laundromat. You see, fortresses of love are not built only from bricks of happiness. They are also mortared with blood tears, and a patience so ruthless it is hard to believe. In Hollywood, where people change lovers as easily as outfits on the red carpet, these giants chose to hold hands through the darkness to reach eternity. This was not a miracle, it was a costly sacrifice that money and fame could never buy. Which redemption among the 10 chapters moved you the most? Leave the name of the couple that made your heart melt the most in the comments below. Share your perspective in the comments, and don't forget to follow so you won't miss the next series exploring the hidden sides of cultural icons.